trying to look how do you impact change. Today, we happen to be focused on what is the role of an organization when your strategy might feel like it's misaligned, or how do you even have a strategy when it feels unclear? And for us, we really acknowledge every organization is a living ecosystem that's connected to people, histories, places, and you can't do it alone in isolation. There's different organizations and groups. And how do we center learning and creating space for reflection to move on through? And that's what we're talking about today. How do we move on through? Some of you might be here because you're feeling like everything's equally important, or I'm exhausted, my team's exhausted, I feel like I'm stretched, or there's these external pressures that just really makes it hard to see from what's next. Sometimes internal communication silos are breaking, we heard, and it just feels disorganized. And how do we get that traction to get through that bucket list and find a renewed approach to your strategy, maybe a new strategy, but really feel like I'm not losing sight? That's what we heard for you. So really today is meant to be like a workshop and interactive. We have some offerings and we're just going to walk through a case study. Does that sound good? I'm assuming yeses. I heard lots of yeses. Um, so let's imagine you're on a journey, you have your strategy, and you went out for a hike and you're trying to get from point A to B, B being the purpose of your organization. But on that journey, what happens is there's a new community need, point C. But you only have 4 gallons of water. And if you know you go to point C, you won't have enough water to go to point B. And the point of starting off with this story is where's the capacity, right? What's the questions you ask yourself, what we've been saying, kind of the missing middle of your strategy to ensure you can be adaptive to change, to how do we include point C on our journey to point B? So for me, I go to nature to understand what's going on in my ecosystem. A lot of things have been changing. It feels like it's unsteady. And this is what I can draw from nature. Is when is the ecosystem that my organization is in? And what I'm saying is your place, your region, your organizations, your state, what's going on? Is it in a growth phase where there's a lot of nutrients, funding, opportunity, willingness to partner and solution? Are you in a place in your ecosystem where it's in conservation mode? Right? That could be tricky. Conservation could mean there's stability, there's strong relationships, there's agreements, there's how do we work together? But conservation can also mean how do you just hold on and let's just see this out? And then that conservation could then go into the waiting out, that there's a release in the system, right? Everything that you're plugged into changes. And so in nature, it looks like a collapse. What does a collapse mean? For nature, there's not enough redundancy to make that stability stay in place. And for us here, it's saying we're stretched so thin that one more drop in the bucket, one more task, one more shake to the system, that your organization could feel like it's collapsing on itself. But that release of energy offers a new way to reorganize and rethink. And that's that step back. So that's what we're offering here. For this exercise is what's that step back, right? It's not in the growth phase. We've been either, a strong stability or we're trying to wait it out. But finally we're in this step back where we have to try something new. But how do we get there? So the navigation tool I reach for is really, what's my three horizon story? If I'm trying to step back and I can't see through the first horizon of what I need to do immediately, like I'm trying to see you all right now, how can we use a way to think through how to get to point A to B with a new C? So I want to feed my family. So if my long-term outcome is I want to feed my family and I'm going to grow a garden because the cost of food's gone up, my immediate, which is horizon one on the right-hand side, left-hand side, is I'm going to buy seeds. So you buy seeds, you even build your bed. So you're ready to go. These seeds are going to feed my family because that's the goal I want. My ultimate outcome is to feed the family. And what I find is the seeds get picked off from the birds, or they're not blossoming because there wasn't enough rain. And so now there's this unexpected uh, approach to how do I get to feed my family food because I was depending on one mode to get there. And so for us, it's how do we figure out Horizon 2 to have multiple paths to get to feeding your family? Now, I know this is a simple breakdown, but the purpose of the webinar is let's keep this simple. So then when we try it on with our organizations or example organizations, we could get more detailed. So we're going to start with an archetype. This might sound like a familiar story, but here we have an organization. We could do it all with enough grit. And what we know is enough grit and passion doesn't always get from A to B. And so here, their original strategy was how do we move a collective group of internal and external stakeholders to move equity and justice within their organizations so it makes a bigger movement of change in the state? And they're going to do that by focusing on influencing, encouraging people, providing best resources, and making sure that there's different structures at the org, the regional, and the state level thinking about moving. Now, the budget's about 5 million, and there's 6 people in this organization, and their main source is membership. So this is important when thinking. This is before their system went through the collapse and the releasing of new energy, and they're trying to reorganize, but they're not there yet. So what could this look like? So if their ultimate goal they're trying to get to is that community members are treated with dignity and have rights and opportunities to access the resources to live their healthiest lives, knowing that not one organization could do it themselves. So they know it's important. How do we build that collective we? And the strategy is about the collective we, but there's a new ecosystem out there. And so they start responding. And so this organization of 6 people start adding new trainings to speak to every possible audience that might be interested in equity and inclusion. And then they're focusing on creating new resources for organizations that might be new to equity work in general. And then they add a policy agenda. So what does that middle strategy look like? So if that's the what you're thinking about every day, again, that's what's in front of you, and you're trying to get around to how to get to my long-term impact, it might look like their middle horizon is focusing on trainings aimed at changing hearts and minds with folks that may not be invested in equity yet or at all. It's unclear. Adding strategies and shifting all of their staff support to focus on developing these new trainings and these new strategies. And then, on top of developing new strategy, changing hearts and minds, they've added a work group to consider how could they have a policy agenda. So the question I put to the group is, does that help with that shift in focus to there's different people in the ecosystem? Does that get to the collective group of organizations? Or how might they have added a new destination that may not lead to those stepping stones and feed those that are, the organizations that are consistently doing the equity work to keep convening? I'm going to pause for a second and look at these chats. So if this sounds familiar to you, go ahead and put it in the chat, even if it's not a question. You could say, yeah, this makes sense to me. This is what I might be experiencing. So then what's our traction points? How do we get out of this? Some of our offerings we have here that I like to go to is how to get out of, but we have to do it all. And we have these traction point questions, and there's different ways to enter it. How could we do it all? Well, pause. What's the function of your org? What can only you do to advance equity and inclusion? So that's that first question. And just know we'll have a follow-up to this webinar. So I know there's a lot of words on this slide, which is a lot to take in, but it's more understanding how can this change our same outcome, but having a different approach to get there. The next one is, okay, if it's only us, our organization is the best to convene or get like-minded organizations to start shifting change not only within their organizations, but in different spaces and places to center equity. Where are we going to focus our efforts? There's 6 of us. So what is the type of meaningful change that this organization might want to see? And what are the outcomes to know that there's a collective we of the organizations working towards change at their individual org and at the more regional and network level? Or you could think about what critical relationships should we focus on? Because you can't know everyone. If you try to touch everyone, is that your role? There's other orgs in the ecosystem you exist in, so that's really critical to understand. Is this our role, and who are the critical relationships for us to work with and to guide and work together? Or it could be, how do we want to show up in these spaces, right? And so the idea is you're getting a boundary to understand. And this is important because we're going to click towards the end where a lot of you asked about staff burnout. This is the traction point to start getting clear on what we're doing so then we could say what's possible. So hang in with me. So then once we know where are we going to focus our efforts is what is the supports we offer within those efforts. So we're constantly getting more clear and clear. So going from passion that everyone needs to be treated with dignity to how, when, and who. And so who are we offering these to? What's our method? How do we know that what we're offering is valuable to these different networks and organizations that want to be part of this collective we that we're building in our region? And then finally, the management system. When I say competitive advantage, I know that could sound a little corporate-y, but what makes you, again, back to your strategic function, what about how you offer convening people, bringing folks together is helpful to the bigger goal of the region or an organization? And what structures and systems do you need in place internally as that organization that wants to convene people? Do you have those structures? What are the norms? And so these are the traction questions to kind of pull you forward when the fatigue and the exhaustion of constantly meeting the moment keeps over hitting you and you're responding, right? And those responses could turn into kind of a problem paradox where you're following that ripple of the unintended consequences. And as you follow the ripples, you forget to see what's the stone that caused the ripples in the first place. And that's how we've seen some organizations get stuck in the first horizon. I mean, hey, guilty here, myself, community science, like how do we know when we're chasing the ripples versus getting to that root cause and patterns, changing those? So then what does it look like for our scrappy, gritty nonprofit organization? We've used our traction questions, and so it's still the same focus, right? The same vision, dignity, trust, and have access to get the services you need, knowing no one organization can do it. But now, after using our traction questions, what they want to be in this moment, what only their org could do is be a trusted advisor to help organizations address inequities, and then particularly in communities, color, and low income. So you said what your role is, how you're going to do it, and who is your focus. This is your audience. And now that missing middle horizon then is how do they're going to focus on convening regional stakeholders to focus on data ecosystems, right? To help understand where are there inequities when it seems like there's not data available. How can we have a regional ecosystem? How do we advise and provide practice and implementation guides for maybe organizations that are new or wanting to figure out how to work together? And then where are we connecting and inviting people and expanding and bridging? So the idea is there's a balance to your middle part of your strategy where you're still anchored in your long-term goal of convening the like-minded organizations, keep going, have different practices and ways of communicating to make change in the organizations and the region. And you've added one new strategy about inviting new people in. So you're responsive and you've reorganized to your new ecosystem, knowing, hey, we need to find and invite other players into the collective we with us, but it's not your only focus because your org was built for convening and getting like-minded people to change and shift networks and change. And what's that first step? What could you hold? And who is holding the other part of that? So that's just an example on how to right size your organization. Now, I know we're trying to keep it simple for the purposes of this webinar, but the idea is how am I working in the current context that I have, my current strategies, at the same time building new ways and testing out how to work together. because the alignment across all of these horizons, our horizon story, really is about how do you think about them all at the same time. And so the immediate horizon you might be thinking about more frequently, and the long-term horizon you're checking in, but really you got to make sure that are we building those stepping stones? And when you feel, oh, our stepping stones stopped, we can't find them anymore, stop, find your traction questions and pull through. Just pausing to see. I think I saw. So then what kind of mindset is helpful in these? And so when you're stepping back in this reorg phase, right? It's a new context. Things that and systems that were once known feel unknown. So it's an opportunity to find new strengths, but at the same time, build upon existing. And so there's this, that's the intentionality and focus when we say alignment across. And so there's these mindsets. So when you step back and think about your team, who are your managers? Who are your visionaries? And who are your entrepreneurs? And really think about that with when you're thinking about your team. Managers help keep what you're currently doing, and they're amazing at that. They keep it going and they keep linking to what that vision is. Visionaries are constantly imagining what's possible. And it's your entrepreneurs, it's that one person's like, how might we? What if? That's just trying to disrupt a different pattern. And that brings that level of curiosity. So you really need all mindsets when you're trying to manage to your horizon two. And that can feel like at times it can feel pathless, but it's really how do you get better at having that adaptive literacy of choosing, there's not going to be the perfect data or the perfect moment, but how do you make a choice? And whose role can that be? Maybe it's not the manager or the visionaries who has that entrepreneurial mind, but that also means there's going to be a lot of fake false starts. You're going to try something, it didn't work, keep going, try it again, try something new. You still have your current strategies going, but you're finding traction of different ways to do it. And the reason why we mentioned the false starts is because you're being mindful, like I mentioned earlier, of you don't want to proliferate problem paradox, where at that first horizon, you're like, but there's so much to address, there's so much need. That's right, there is. And make sure, how are we making sure that we're addressing the stone that's being dropped in the water and not following all the ripples? Because you could get stuck on that first horizon. And I see some things happening in the chat. What is the process for revisiting Horizon 2? Mm, that's a great question. So for us, let me go back. For that question, that's awesome. I'm so glad you submitted it. Is really thinking about the traction. So the process is uh, when are opportunities to first bring up these questions? And so ideal state, you're at a table and you're thinking about it all the time. But there's, for me, I mean, I've noticed sometimes in organizations is someone asking the question for pause and reflect. And then through that conversation, finding opportunities to say, what can we do right now to get out of the buckets? And so I think when we go to the next slide about some head and heart decisions, that we'll get to it. But if that doesn't answer your Horizon 2 question of the process, let me know. Put it back in the chat, and then we'll make sure that we're answering that question. So I just love, keep it coming, y'all. Now you got to bear with me, clicking through these slides. So back to Horizon. So the missing middle two. So let's imagine that you've been able to ask some of these traction questions and understand what do we keep? What do we try new? Because there's a new context, there's new players in my ecosystem. The weather has changed. At the same time, you still have this, our example organization still has 6 staff members. So although they're gritty and willing to put in the work, at what cost? And so the pause and pull back with revisiting your strategy is the head and heart hurt decisions of saying, do we have the capacity to spread ourselves thinner to meet the additional need of the community without compromising our core mission, right? And so for a gritty organization, do they have the means to tend to new friends, stakeholders, and people that are new to equity to walk with them while still keeping the core mission of moving that collective network of people to address an issue? Can six people hold that? Can six people make curriculum and hold convenings for two different audiences on a budget that's less than $5 million? And so at times even this question feels so big. So how do you make this like a chompable question to start the conversation? And so as you're thinking about your new strategies, you're like, okay, I hear you, the missing middle. Here's new ways of how we're going to reach our impact. Here's what we're going to keep doing. But what could we do right now, given our budget and people? What could we do next? And what could we do if we can get to it? And that third category of if we get to it is important because you may not need to because you've done the now and the next, meaning you've got to the stone that was dropped in the water. And so that final ripple, you may not be a problem that you have to address because it's been resolved with your middle horizon being that pathway to your ultimate outcome. So, for our gritty org, you could think about what roles need to be in place, behaviors, interactions, collaboration, if we are to invite more people and hold different audiences as a convener. So some of the roles could be a problem solver, someone that's interrogated. So you're getting clarity on roles. So someone who mentioned like how do you start the process of Horizon 2? This could be your entry point as well, of figuring out, wait a minute, what's our different roles as we're addressing all the different community needs and what we set out to do as an organization. And you can say, my role is problem solver. What is your role? And someone might say, hey, my role, I see it as the cross-organizational relationships and culture. So we're making sure our internal communication's going. And someone's like, great, my role is the network and relations. How do we bridge within those that we're already working with and welcoming others in? So you're getting clarity and then asking, can we do this? Is there a role missing? Or can we do all these roles right now? So then it's thinking about what structures need to be in place. If we do add new audiences, do we have the infrastructure to have TA and one-on-one coaching, perhaps, right? Or phone calls to talk with that person? Do we have the trainers that know how to work with that audience or that new organization to new to equity? Do we have those resources? And that is that where we want to spend them? So this could look like, okay, we need some internal operation processes for engaging our core network of people. How do we internally have agreement how to support those networks? Do we need partnerships with other offices or maybe different stakeholders or subcontractors to help with this legal and IT? Because it's a different ecosystem out there. There's different rules, and we don't have the capacity to be translating them, but maybe a better way to use our resources to make sure we have legal and IT resources and maybe not take on the new audiences. So again, you're strategizing and getting intentionality of what you do, how you do it, and do you have the capacities to do it well? And really sitting with that you're doing no harm. And then what are the external forces? And you know those, but it's understanding, okay, with the constraining budget, the changes in the funding landscape, and the sentiment in the region, which audience needs the most attention and resources? Is it about keeping the network to keep going, keep your focus on equity? We got you, we could do this. Or is it about bringing in new stakeholders? It could be both, but remember, there's six of you. So what can only your organization do? And maybe there's another organization in your ecosystem that holds that other part of the equation. And that's what's exciting in a future webinar that we'll have a colleague, Jasmine Williams Washington, talk to y'all about who else do I work with to achieve our mission. Let me click right here. Awesome. Mm. So we have a question of how do we know we're getting at that root, that rock? And in one of our guides that we have online, so we'll make sure that's part of the follow-ups, is really understanding, am I getting at the symptoms? So if you imagine a tree, the leaves are green and it's connected to this trunk that goes deep roots in the ground. And the soil is changing as the ecosystem's changing. But if you keep making a strategy for green leaves, but then the season changes, now the leaves are yellow. That's not how often can you tend to the seasons of change of the leaves when it's really the roots and the tree trunk that's talking to the soil and then making the change. So it's really about how do I know I'm getting to the roots of the issue that's informing what I'm experiencing. So it's like, hopefully that helps, but we'll have a follow-up on that. That's really great question. Let me pause. There's been a lot of talking with y'all, and hopefully you're ready for the rolling up of your sleeves and like how do we get in there to figure out our missing horizon. Um, is there any other questions that you all are curious about or that we can answer? Mm, there's a good one about, here it is. How do I work with leadership that creates the crisis mindset? And so, what we have found helpful is really what's that first stepping stone into Horizon 2? So, if you're not in the position to make organizational level decisions, you're not in the leadership team, what you can offer is how might we take that first step? Because often in the crisis mode, you're thinking about right now, and the brain gets frozen or foggy. It's hard to see what's next when you have an overwhelmed mind. And sometimes your role might be what's the first step, and then articulating it clearly. So then that helps either your leader or your team take the first step forward. And you're saying, hey, look at me. Here's the next step. And so then as you take one step at a time, it then becomes how are we able to look at the different ways of being together? But oftentimes it's just naming it like, hey, what's the first step we could take? Mm. So another question that we got was, how do you find balance in the burnout of the solutions? So we're hoping is with the burnout, and a lot of you asked about burnout, is by being clear on how you're implementing your strategy. So you've noticed that there's drift or you have a bucket list. You've done your traction questions to regroup to the new ecosystem you're existing in. The head and heart hurt questions that it hurts to make these decisions at the same time those boundaries understand what's possible for your team, because if you're pushing your team to the limits then you can't meet with the community. So the idea of saying what could we do now with the capacities we have, and do we have the right structures to the new strategy, is one way to address the exhaustion structurally as you're laying on new relationships how to talk about it. Mm. Someone brought in, I think it's about that routine reflection on like building the muscle on strategic alignment. That's right. And for us, we call it continuous learning. But what's that learning culture? Again, that's really important in these chaotic states because it's how do we understand what's going on? And it's not that the chaos goes to simple, but at least goes to complex. Because with complex, you can start finding pieces of to take on, and then that complex becomes simple or maybe automated. So then some parts of the decision is routine, so your mind can take on the next chaotic or complex issue on the horizon. So it's trying to tend to yourself individually on how much can a person or a team think about. And then the more you can understand and routinize, like, okay, these decisions, we know this matches the moment here. What's next? How do we think about the next um, chaos to bring it down to complicated, to bring it down to simple? And Michelle, another colleague of ours, will be offering a webinar. Okay, if I have my three horizons, what am I measuring so we can learn what's working and what's not quickly? So then you're constantly revisiting your missing middle, which is hopefully not your missing middle, but it's iterating and finding those new pathways to your ultimate outcome. What else, folks? Awesome. So we're really excited that you joined us. And this is just the beginning of how do you think about your strategy in these uncertain times. And really, what we are hoping to offer here today is that missing middle. So you don't have hollow strategies of bucket lists and grit and forget to have extra water on your journey to your extra community needs, that it's in service to getting to that ultimate outcome. And one way to do that is really thinking about what are we strong at? What is our role in our ecosystem of people and funding that we do well? And then how do we line up our staffing systems and practices? Again, that reloop and revisiting is really critical, not only to make sure the strategies align to where you want to go with the new context, but your team is part of that vision and not left behind or exhausted. And some of the ways to think about that kind of try it on as you think about what's my three horizon story or what's my what's, how am I going to get there and why do I want to get there? Is how do I think about all those three horizons at the same time? Is just saying, okay, what's the most pressing issue? And how can my organization address that? Is it our role to address? And that's really the hardest question to answer. So hopefully with those traction probes, it helps you answer that question. So you're making sure that you're mobilizing your resources effectively that makes sense for you, your people, and what you have in front of you at this ecosystem, what you can change. So then you're minimizing your reactionary decision making. Again, that's that problem paradox where you're following the unintended consequences, that you're stuck in that first horizon of what's without looking at who's dropping the stone because that's the game. The system is infusing chaos. The oppressive system wants us to stay on the what's, wants us to find different paths, but never get to the horizon that we want to see or live out with other people. And so it's saying yes, and I'm going to meet the moment and find my traction points to keep persisting and going through to find new ways to reach that goal. So that's sometimes leveraging your existing strengths, maybe that entrepreneurial mindset or creating new ones and saying, yes, it makes sense to add a new way of being or a new audience for our gritty org example to create new curriculum for that audience to move through and join that collective way. And again, that maintaining momentum is not only about being curious and having that entrepreneurial mindset, it really is about not overextending yourself. And for me, I think that's the hardest one because, again, that's that head heart work, but trusting you're part of an ecosystem and someone else is going to hold that piece. And if not, working with the system to figure out who. And then really that lens of feedback. How do you keep redefining? Because really, Horizon 2 is your longest one. And I have a colleague that says sometimes it feels like it's the most annoying one. Because right as you're starting a new way of being, it feels like a false start. But it's not. It's really a part of Horizon 1 where you're figuring out what do we focus on. But as you keep trying and finding where you'll focus, that momentum will shift and you find out what are the right strategies for you with those traction probes to get to that impact you want. And hopefully that horizon 3 of feeding the family that we initially started with becomes your first horizon and you have something new. So the idea really is cyclic, which is why we draw upon nature. Let's see. Just checking one more time to see if there's a question. Oh, awesome. So we had a lot of questions about the ripple and finding that root cause. And so we'll make sure that that's part of our follow-up. But what we really want to know is what else is helpful? What else could we be talking? What's feedback on this webinar? What's next? What would be helpful in this moment that we can offer out into the world? And one for us is that we're going to have a couple other webinars that are focused on how do you build that organizational capacity to change, to navigate the change, to strengthen your ecosystem, knowing you need to have impact across what am I doing right now? What am I doing next? To build to your ultimate horizon. And that will be Jasmine Williams Washington. And then Michelle Haynes Baratz will be offering a webinar. Okay, but how do I measure what matters? There's a lot of things I can be measuring. And Amber, you just told me there's three horizons I have to be paying attention to. That's just too much data. Well, Michelle will help us figure out, well, what do I measure in Horizon 1 that might have a different rate of change compared to my middle horizon where I'm iterating a lot, and that ultimate horizon that might need more time to happen, and so you're not measuring as fast. But what's the essential measurements and not to be overwhelmed? What do I look to see through? And what we all like to say is, how do we move through? So I just want to say thank you for your time. Let's keep the conversation going. Let's do some good work together. Let's talk and support each other. But I could be reached at ambertrout@communityscience.com. And we hope to see you on our next organizational effectiveness webinar series. So take care, be well, and talk soon.